Good morning! Welcome to my inclusive education video. My name's Hubben and let's get started. I'm going to split this video up into 4 sections. Firstly, starting off with curriculum, then moving on to pedagogy, and then talking about assessment. And finally, I'll share with you a few of my experiences I had throughout the unit and a few learning tips and things that I found interesting. Hope you enjoy. So as we get started on curriculum, we first of all need to know what curriculum is. So curriculum it's the course of study that we need to do and teach in our classrooms in order to meet our set achievement standards. There's many different types of curriculums. We have an Australia-wide curriculum, and we also have state curriculums, which is obviously specific to our state. If I was to put curriculum in an analogy, it would be like our recipe card to make a cake. It's the ingredients and the method. It's what we have to do to reach our overall goal, which is making the cake. It's a written instructions, the way I see it. First up, we have the Australian curriculum under Health and Physical Education. And this tells us what is expected to be taught and the quality of learning that is expected from our students. They have achieved this through including content descriptors and elaborations that really make it specific to the things we need to be doing as teachers. The Australian curriculum achieves inclusivity because of its 3-dimensional curriculum. I'll show you a picture of this to better explain it, and then I can point out a few things that is included within the Australian curriculum. As you can see here, the 3-dimensional approach that the Australian curriculum has allows us to have a lot of flexibility in our teaching and learning practices. So it includes, on the top there, you can see the cross-curriculum priorities. We have our 8 learning areas, which are like our subject areas, and then on the forward side we have the general capabilities. So it's a 3-dimensional curriculum as it's described, and it's important for increasing inclusion within the curriculum. It says that it allows learning activities to be contextualized and allows us to use a variety of approaches to make our teaching more inclusive. And I think that's pretty important because it does generate a lot of flexibility and we can move around much more within those content descriptions and learning areas that are provided to us. The Victorian curriculum, again, was very similar to the Australian curriculum in the way that it was set up, but there was a few things mentioned in its overview that made it stand out, made it seem a little more inclusive. So it had very similar content descriptors and achievement standards. However, it said it ran on a continuum of not of years of schooling, but the years of learning and the learning level that they were at. So this made it more inclusive because then teachers could they needed to relate to previous learning and to other factors as well. It also says that the curriculum allowed it to plan for students' actual level of learning and not their assumed level of knowledge. So they had to rely on those previous things. And a following statement said that the content descriptors and the achievement standards was designed to allow continuous learning for all students. And that was really, really good to see. And underneath that, then they mentioned students with disabilities and additional learning needs. They mentioned students with English as an additional language and gifted and talented students. So you can see from that it's really considered a whole variety of learners, and it is really attempted to make a more inclusive curriculum. So those 2 forms of curriculum are very accessible online. And without going into a curriculum review, from just those small things mentioned there, it's easy to see how curriculum creates the opportunity for inclusion within a school and within HPE environments. So we can see there that a curriculum can definitely be inclusive and it can definitely be not inclusive. So I found a paper by Morgan 2011, and she really describes in different ways that a curriculum can be inclusive and what principles and elements of a curriculum make it inclusive and how we can act and practice as teachers to to be more inclusive in our classroom. So I'll pop something on the screen and we can go over a few points that she makes within an article that really make for inclusive education in HPE. So in Morgan's paper, I found a few key ideas that I took from it that I really thought she thought constituted an inclusive curriculum. One line in it for me was almost a definition of her work, where all students' entitlement to access and participate in a course is anticipated, acknowledged, and taken into account. It recognises students have identities and are shaped by previous experiences. I really like this because it's already saying that we know students have a right to participate in a course, but it goes further to say that we need to anticipate, acknowledge, and take this into account, saying that we need to reflect upon this and make adjustments to our teaching accordingly so we do teach more inclusively. She also makes a few other points there that you can have a read of, and lastly, she says that all students are entitled to the curriculum, which we know this, but we can also link this to the work of Cooper and Fennick, 2009. They say that all students are entitled to the curriculum, but we cannot modify the curriculum for students. And yes, we definitely do have to modify our teaching practices and modify our pedagogy, but we cannot lower the standards for students that we don't think are capable of achieving them. We need to find new ways for them to achieve those achievement standards. So I will talk about this in the next section in pedagogy in just a moment. Next, we're on to pedagogy. Pedagogy is different to curriculum. It is how we use the curriculum, the instructions that we're given, how we interpret that and use it within our teaching practices and within our classrooms. So for the cake analogy, like we did before, this would be how I read those instructions and what I'm actually putting into the bowl to make the cake. So I would double chocolate chips, probably double the icing, like we interpret it how we like it and what we think is best into classrooms. So that's how pedagogy differs to curriculum. So within health and physical education, we've all observed the students that don't get involved in class, that are a bit shy, that don't want to really actively participate or aren't enjoying themselves within the HPE classes. So Anne Hagen and Lindstad 2015 said that there were a few reasons for this, and they called it hiding in PE. These reasons were pupils were afraid to make fools of themselves, and they didn't have the courage to kind of put themselves out there or feel comfortable to participate. There was a lot of performance pressure, and if they were unable to master activities, then weakness might be displayed for them and shown to everyone else. They wanted to avoid pain, so being hit by a ball in some activities, or physical pain from physical exertion. So if they're a bit tired and they didn't want to show other people that they're trying really hard, or they're in pain because their physical fitness isn't as high as their friend, or they were worried that they were going to be bullied and pestered within the physical education environment. This was also supported through Copland's and Bruce's 2017 work, saying that schools generally teach in a vacuum, and we've all seen this in HPE environments. We teach to the middle of the bell curve, and we don't always remember to consider societal, moral, political influences and issues. And you only need to go on placement once to see that in PE we often, it's easy to forget about the ones sitting out, the ones that don't want to participate, and we need to work towards ways of finding ways to include them within our classes in everyday lessons. This is where I believe differentiated teaching and learning practices come into pedagogy. You'll probably see these everywhere in educational resources, and Thea Dowlight's 2012 suggests that we can drive up the standards of the quality of teaching and learning practices by taking a pupil-centered approach. Now, that would mean considering the individuals for their strengths, their weaknesses, and adjusting your pedagogy accordingly to make for a more inclusive unit. Like this, Farias, Hastie and Mesquita really complement this by saying that it is our pedagogical resources, so what we're doing in our classrooms, that capitalise the opportunities for inclusion embedded in the curriculum. So it's how we take the curriculum and use it is what makes the inclusive curriculum actually happen. So for a basketball unit where a lot of students were being left out, not participating, they used their intervention and they did things such as choosing developmentally appropriate tasks, ensuring that there's a lot of time for teamwork and team games instead of it all just being competition. And they really talked about the key concepts behind inclusion. And that made for more inclusive pedagogy that was based from the curriculum, and it just depended on how they used it to make more inclusive classrooms. By using MacDonald et al. 2010's notion of masculine culture in HPE classrooms, I can create an example to show us how such a small thing hidden in our pedagogy can change the learning outcomes or achievements students can get within a classroom. So masculine culture, imagine there's two classes. They're exactly the same. One class is 4 weeks in to their HPE unit, and there's a masculine culture in that classroom. The other, exactly the same class, they're 4 weeks into their HPE unit, but there's just an open and inclusive culture in their classroom. Just imagine the kind of differences of results and participation you would get in those two classrooms, especially from the kids that are a bit more nervous, don't have the confidence and the skills of other very skilled and confident students. Just imagine what kind of differences our pedagogy can create in those circumstances. Thinking about all of these things and how we use pedagogy, interpreting, implementing the curriculum, we can really see how we can change our classrooms, the effect that we can have in our lessons for our students. So there's a few things I'll pop on the next slide that really make for inclusive pedagogy, and it's just some things you can maybe take some notes on, useful tips that you can use in your teaching to make for more inclusive classrooms. As we suggested earlier, personalised learning and pupil-centred approaches are really good ways to make for inclusive pedagogy. So I've just popped on the screen a couple of points that taken from the Australian curriculum that you can use as ways to make for more inclusive pedagogy. Lastly, I'm brought to assessment. Assessment is how we judge our students' level of learning. And if we relate this back to the cake analogy, this would be the cake that comes out of the oven and how good it is in relation to the instructions that we followed from the recipe and what we actually did. From the help of Kirk et al. 2013, I was able to explore inclusive assessment. He said that students have reported that the tests in HP are often negatively experienced and they convey little knowledge about students' level of learning. So therefore, they're not very deep and valuable, and they don't really validate any learning that's occurred in the classroom. And these can obviously have a negative effect on student motivations, which is not what we're aiming for. We want to maximise participation. So we don't want assessment that really steers students away from being active participants in our HPE classrooms. So alternative forms of assessment are those that differ from traditional assessment standards. What I've popped on the screen here is a picture from DeLuca's framework, the black and white one, and the picture beneath that is just another one that helped me to understand DeLuca's framework a little bit better. So, as we were discussing earlier, Kirk et al. 2013, his example of alternative assessment would be actively solving realistic problems through application of new knowledge, prior knowledge, and regular skills. So using DeLuca's framework, this would be transgressive conception of inclusivity, because we're using students' knowledge as the vehicle of generation of new knowledge, and that is actually in DeLuca's framework. So this form of assessment is often more authentic and gives students opportunities to show learning and continue to learn through others. Tomlinson, 2003, also made me think of why we actually do assessment. Yes, we need to rank students and figure out where they're at, but another huge reason of assessing students is because we need to figure out where they're at so we can provide feedback to them on how they can improve. And it also gives us, if we use formative assessment, it gives us an indication of how we need to adjust our pedagogy and our teaching approaches so that we can get them to the achievement standards that they need to be at. Finally, I've just put some key ways to make assessment more inclusive in our classrooms from Hay and Penny 2011. So that leaves me with my final question. What have I learnt from this? And what have you learnt from this? I was reading some of Fitzgerald 2005's work, and he could tell me a lot of things, and he interviewed a lot of students. But one key message that I did get from him that was that you can learn a lot from your students if they are given the opportunity to share their viewpoint. And that, to me, was like, I could write about it, but I really wanted to take just that from it. If you ask your students and if you give them an opportunity to share their thoughts and what they think might work better for themselves or for the class or for their friends, then give them a shot. Have a listen and see what you can do and how you can adapt your teaching practices to make a more inclusive classroom. Secondly, for me, language matters. And I'm not just talking about, hey guys, hey girls. I'm also talking about who you give praise to in your classes. So I would be careful not to always give praise to the skilled athletes in your classroom. Make sure you're encouraging and acknowledging those who are not so confident and who are not so athletic as well. The self-fulfilling prophecy, I feel like, is a real thing, and how we socially construct our classrooms and the environment we create plays a massive role in the learning experience that we're going to have from our students. So I would encourage you just to be aware of those things and be aware of them. Lastly, and probably most importantly, especially to me, is get to know your students. You'll find out pretty quickly that one size definitely does not fit all. And if you're able to get to know your students, you'll make better adjustments to your teaching to suit their needs. They'll feel more valued and they'll have better learning experiences in your classrooms. I'll pop up some tips from Ruth's slides as I finish off and my reference list. Thank you for having me.